Pam Bondi had seen corruption before. She had gone toe-to-toe with powerful adversaries who thought they were above the law, men who had built empires on deception and buried the truth beneath layers of influence. But today felt different. As she stepped into the grand courtroom, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor, she could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. The air was thick with tension, unspoken, yet palpable. Lawyers adjusted their ties, reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, and the jury sat upright, as if anticipating something seismic. Then there was the man at the center of it all. Judge Howard Gates. He sat at the high bench, his robe draped over his shoulders like a king on his throne. His face was unreadable, cold, indifferent, but his eyes carried something deeper, something darker. Pam had been in front of strict judges before, but Gates was different. From the moment she had taken on this case, she had sensed an invisible hand pulling strings behind the scenes. Witnesses hesitant to testify. Court orders mysteriously delayed. Documents missing at the last moment. Now, standing in front of him, she realized why. This wasn't just any case. This was personal. Pam inhaled deeply and stepped to the center of the courtroom, her voice steady. Your Honor, today, we bring forth a case that questions not only financial integrity but the very foundation of our judicial system. She turned to the jury, letting the weight of her words settle. The evidence will show that Charles Lawson, a real estate tycoon, orchestrated a vast network of fraud, manipulating property values, engaging in bribery, and siphoning millions of dollars in illegal profits. But more disturbingly, we will show that his crimes were enabled, protected, by powerful allies who ensured justice would never reach him. The room was silent, save for the distant clicking of cameras. Pam then turned toward Gates, her gaze unwavering. And we will prove that corruption, no matter how well concealed, will not escape the light. A flicker of something crossed Gates' face. Annoyance? Amusement? It was gone before she could be certain. Then he spoke. Ms. Bondi, he said, his voice carrying an edge, let's not make this a performance. Stick to the evidence. Pam didn't flinch. Of course, Your Honor. I intend to. She walked back to her table, pulled out a thick binder, and flipped it open. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A, financial records that demonstrate the direct link between Charles Lawson's properties and illicit money transfers. Gates barely glanced at the documents before shaking his head. Denied. Insufficient foundation. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Pam's jaw tightened. Your Honor, these records come directly from bank transactions, verified by forensic accountants. They establish. I said denied. Gates' tone was sharp, final. A warning. Pam paused, scanning the faces in the room. The jury exchanged uncertain glances. Reporters jotted notes feverishly. Even Charles Lawson, seated smugly at the defense table, smirked. That was when she knew. This trial wasn't just about exposing Lawson. It was about exposing the man sitting on the bench. Pam adjusted her stance, as if planting herself firmly against an invisible storm. Very well, Your Honor, she said smoothly. I will proceed with another exhibit. She retrieved another document and held it up. Exhibit B, communications between Mr. Lawson and city officials, discussing property evaluations that were fraudulently adjusted to evade taxes. Gates sighed, his fingers drumming against his bench. Ms. Bondi, I will not allow you to turn this courtroom into a circus. Move on. Pam hesitated, staring him down. Your Honor, That's an order, Gates snapped. Another wave of murmurs filled the room. Pam clenched her jaw. She knew this tactic. Gates wasn't just shutting her down, he was making a show of authority, undermining her credibility in front of the jury. She glanced at the defense table. Lawson sat comfortably, twirling a pen between his fingers. His lawyer, a seasoned professional, whispered something in his ear. They weren't worried. Because they had Gates in their pocket. But Pam wasn't done. She turned toward the jury, her voice cutting through the tension. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, why would a judge, who is sworn to uphold the law, refuse to allow financial records that could prove fraud? Why would he block evidence that speaks to the very heart of this case? Objection. Lawson's lawyer shot up. Prosecutor is questioning the court's authority. Overruled, Gates said, but his voice was tight. Pam met his gaze. A crack. Just a small one. But it was enough. The warning. Ms. Bondi approached the bench. Pam straightened her blazer and walked forward. Gates leaned in, his voice low enough for only her to hear. You're walking on dangerous ground, he murmured. Pam didn't blink. Am I? His eyes narrowed. There are consequences for pushing too hard. She tilted her head. Are you threatening me, Your Honor? He smirked, a slow, deliberate expression. I'm giving you a chance to step back. To reconsider where you're taking this case. Pam's heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had suspected Gates was compromised, but now she was certain. This wasn't just about Lawson's corruption. Gates was protecting someone. Or protecting himself. She took a slow breath, then stepped back. Understood, Your Honor. She turned and walked away. But inside, something had shifted. Gates thought he had won. He had no idea what was coming. The breaking point. Back at her table, Pam flipped through her notes. She had one final piece of evidence, something she had been holding in reserve. It was a financial ledger. And on it, clear as day, was a signature. Not Lawson's. Gates'. Pam exhaled slowly. This was it. She stepped forward, raising the document. Your Honor, I'd like to submit one final piece of evidence. Gates lifted a brow. I hope you're not wasting this court's time, Ms. Bondi. Pam walked closer, locking eyes with him. I assure you, I'm not. She turned to the jury, then held up the document. This, she said, her voice ringing through the courtroom, is a financial record. It details a transaction made by Charles Lawson's development firm, a payment to an undisclosed account. She paused. But what makes this truly interesting isn't the payment itself. She turned the page and pointed to the bottom. It's who authorized it. She flipped the document toward the jury. And there, printed in bold ink, was Judge Howard Gates' signature. The courtroom erupted. Gasps. Murmurs. Reporters scrambling to jot down notes. The jury whispering in shock. Gates' face paled. Pam folded her arms. And for the first time, Judge Howard Gates had no words. The courtroom had never been this silent. For a full 5 seconds, the air stood still, thick with the weight of revelation. Pam Bondi let the moment sink in. Judge Howard Gates, one of the most powerful men in the judiciary, had just been exposed. His signature, inked onto a financial transaction linked directly to Charles Lawson's corrupt empire, was now in the open for all to see. Pam saw it in the jury's faces, the realization, the shift in perception. Gates wasn't just an enforcer of the law, he was a conspirator. And he knew it. From his high seat, Gates' grip tightened on the edge of his bench. His normally unreadable expression faltered, his mouth pressed into a thin line, his pupils dilating slightly. He was calculating, weighing options, but for the first time, he was afraid. Pam didn't let up. Your Honor, she said, voice steady, unwavering, this document links a direct financial transaction between Charles Lawson's firm and an offshore account. And your signature is on it. She turned to the jury, then to the rows of spectators. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Gates has denied crucial evidence, shut down witness testimonies, and attempted to bury financial records. And now we see why. The reporters were frantic, pens scratching across their notepads, some typing so fast their keyboards clattered. The defense attorney, Victor Langston, shot up from his seat. Objection. This is wildly inappropriate. Gates seized the lifeline. Sustained. Ms. Bondi, unless you have an immediate and legal basis for these accusations, I suggest. Pam cut him off. I do, Your Honor. She reached into her case file and pulled out another document. This is a sworn affidavit from a whistleblower inside the finance department of Lawson's firm. It confirms that payments were made to multiple offshore accounts, including the one tied to this signature. She turned the page toward the jury. And here's something even more damning. The recipient of those payments is listed as a consulting firm called Gates & Associates. A sharp intake of breath swept through the courtroom. The name was a dead giveaway. The walls were closing in. Judge Gates losing battle. Gates recovered quickly, but Pam saw the flicker of panic behind his eyes. Ms. Bondi, he said, his voice still carrying the authority of his position, I will not allow this courtroom to become a stage for baseless allegations. If you continue down this road without proper evidentiary foundation, I will hold you in contempt. Pam tilted her head, smiling slightly. Contempt, she echoed. For what? Presenting legally obtained evidence. Her confidence rattled him. She saw it now, he wasn't just angry. He was cornered. Victor Langston stepped in again, his voice forceful. Your Honor, I demand an immediate recess. The prosecution is clearly engaging in theatrics meant to derail these proceedings. Pam countered, her voice like a blade. Mr. Langston, what part of official bank records and sworn affidavits do you consider theatrics? If anything, the only derailment happening here is the defense scrambling to keep the truth from coming out. She turned back to Gates. And the only person trying to obstruct justice, Your Honor, is you. Gates' knuckles whitened as he gripped the gavel. Enough, he growled. Ms. Bondi, you are dangerously close to being held in contempt. Pam took a step forward. And you, Judge Gates, are dangerously close to being charged with obstruction of justice, fraud, and abuse of power. The courtroom held its breath. This wasn't just legal maneuvering anymore. This was war. The moment of collapse. Gates glanced toward the back of the courtroom, toward the exit, toward security, toward anything that might give him an out. There was none. Pam had laid the foundation carefully. She had anticipated his every move, every denial, every rejection of evidence. And now, it was checkmate. She nodded toward the bailiff stationed near the courtroom doors. Officers, I'd like to make a formal request. The lead officer straightened, hand instinctively brushing the cuffs at his belt. Gates' voice thundered. Stand down. That's an order. But the damage was done. Pam lifted a document high, letting the courtroom see the official charging request she had prepared the night before. Judge Howard Gates, she said, voice clear, you are officially under investigation for judicial corruption. The evidence has been submitted, and as of this moment, I am filing a request to have you immediately removed from this case and placed under arrest. A stunned silence fell. Then. Chaos. Reporters rushed toward the front of the courtroom, flashes exploding like fireworks. Spectators gasped, some shouting, others murmuring in disbelief. Gates shot up from his chair. You can't do this. His voice cracked, fury turning into desperation. Pam met his gaze, unyielding. You did this to yourself. The bailiffs moved in. For the first time in his career, Judge Howard Gates had no power. No authority. Nothing. The moment the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, his body sagged. It was over. As Gates was led through the doors, Victor Langston stood frozen, unable to react. Lawson, however, was another story. Pam turned her gaze toward him, watching as the realization hit. Without Gates, his shield was gone. And that meant he was next. The developer wiped his hands against his suit, his mind visibly racing. Then, as if coming to a decision, he leaned toward Langston and whispered something. Pam didn't need to hear it to know what was happening. Lawson was trying to cut a deal. But she wasn't about to let him escape justice either. She stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson, don't bother strategizing. This trial will continue, and now you no longer have your personal judge to protect you." Lawson forced a grin, though there was sweat forming at his temple. "Ms. Bondi, I'm a businessman. Perhaps there's a way we can negotiate." Pam's stare could have frozen fire. "You don't negotiate with criminals. You prosecute them." She turned away, leaving him to stew in his own panic. Outside the courthouse, the media had already gathered, a sea of cameras and microphones waiting. Pam stepped onto the courthouse steps, ready to address them. One reporter shoved a mic forward. "Ms. Bondi, can you confirm if Judge Gates will face criminal charges?" She nodded. "Yes. The evidence against him is overwhelming. He will answer for his actions." Another reporter cut in. "And what does this mean for Charles Lawson? Will the trial continue?" Pam's voice was firm. "This trial is bigger than one man. It's about restoring faith in our justice system. The case against Lawson will continue, and we will see this through to the end." A third voice called out. "Some people say this case proves corruption runs deep in the system. What's your response to that?" Pam looked directly into the cameras. "My response," she said. She let a beat pass, then spoke with conviction. "This case proves that no one, not a billionaire, not a businessman, and not even a judge, is above the law." The cameras flashed. Pam turned, heading back inside. This wasn't over yet. Lawson was still standing. But not for long. The courtroom had transformed overnight. With Judge Gates removed in disgrace, a new judge was appointed, one with no ties to the corruption that had tainted these proceedings. The tension that had once gripped the room had shifted. The power dynamic had changed. And Charles Lawson knew it. Seated at the defense table, the once powerful developer was no longer the untouchable businessman who had bribed his way through the system. He was a man on the verge of losing everything. Pam Bondi saw it in his posture, the subtle twitch of his fingers, the way his gaze darted around the room, searching for a lifeline. There was none. Without Judge Gates tipping the scales in his favor, Lawson's defense team was forced to fight on merit. And merit was something they sorely lacked. The prosecution wasted no time dismantling his empire of lies. Pam presented mountains of evidence, financial records, wire transfers, emails that linked Lawson's company to fraudulent contracts and under-the-table deals. Witnesses, once silenced by fear, now spoke freely, detailing years of corruption, bribery, and backroom deals. Every piece of evidence painted a damning picture. Lawson had built his fortune by exploiting the system. And now, that system was holding him accountable. The jury's faces told the story before the verdict was even read. They had seen enough. Guilty on all counts. When the foreman stood, the room held its breath. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit bribery, guilty. With every word, the weight on Lawson's shoulders grew heavier. His once confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a hollow stare. He had lost. The gavel slammed down. Sentencing would follow, but the message was already clear.